my name is Peter Hoghton. I'm a gameplay engineer. I'm the education and training manager at CG Spectrum's GameChanger Academy in Melbourne. Previously, I was a gameplay engineer at Ubisoft for just over 3.5 years, working in their Australian office on the X-Defiant project. I've been interested in video games my whole life. So my father got me into gaming from a very young age. He himself was into gaming from his childhood as well. He had old systems like an Atari 2600 and a Commodore Amiga that he would regularly set up, and we'd have sort of retro gaming sessions when I was a kid. And then my first console was the original PlayStation, so I've been gaming ever since then. In particular, though, my father and I would play a lot of PC games, so CRPGs were our personal favorite. I remember the original Baldur's Gate was probably the first game that I played from start to finish. Absolutely loved it and was hooked ever since. So my father was also a hobbyist programmer as well. He didn't do it professionally, but in his spare time, he liked to tinker away. So I would watch him program. And then a bit later on, when a game called Neverwinter Nights came out, which was a CRPG like Baldur's Gate, that actually had a pretty advanced, for the time, toolkit where you could mod the game and create your own custom dungeons, your own combat encounters, your own stories. So that was sort of my first foray into game development, was building custom modules for Neverwinter Nights as a young kid. So I studied basically a computer science bachelor at Monash University. It was a very generalist degree, which touched a bit of everything, but I did major in game development. The degree was sort of before universities and colleges started offering game-specific degrees. So that was sort of the best or the most relevant offering at the time that I was there. But it was really good because I got exposure with a wide range of game development disciplines. So on the programming side alone, I got exposure to many different languages, obviously C++, but also C#, Java, some web development, lots of different things. And then outside of programming, I also got to dip my toe into things like 2D and 3D animation, game design, production. So I actually got quite a good offer to do a postgraduate degree on a full scholarship with a stipend, which wasn't really my passion or what I wanted to do, but it paid the bills at the time while I was looking for work. So there was actually quite a long gap between when I graduated and my first industry role. It was actually about 5 years that it took me to break in. I first got approached by a recruiter on LinkedIn, and they happened to be from Ubisoft, who were opening an Australian studio at around that time and looking for local talent. So yeah, when I graduated, my grades were okay. Like I did pretty well in terms of education, but I wasn't a particularly standout candidate right after I graduated. Certainly, I had a portfolio filled with the typical university assignments and the degree, which wasn't really enough to stand out, particularly in an international market. The Australian games industry wasn't that big at the time. Still isn't that big, but it's better now than it was then. And so most of the jobs that I was looking at were international. And when you're competing with candidates in the country that you're applying for, you have to really be an exceptional candidate for the company to sponsor your visa and relocate you there and take a big risk on you. So I just wasn't hitting that bar. And so if I could do it over to sort of shorten that space of time, the 5 years that it took me to break in, I would definitely opt for something like what CG Spectrum offers in terms of its postgraduate courses. Just that tailored coursework specifically designed to transition you from student to career ready, something that can give you not the sort of technical skills that you learn at university or the theory that you learn at university, but particularly the soft skills and the studio experience that you get. That would be invaluable, and that's the sort of thing that would separate you from every other university graduate with a degree. So if I could do it over again, if that sort of thing was available back then, that's definitely the sort of thing that I would look at. Typical day in the life of a gameplay engineer. First thing you would do is, when you come into work, is get the latest version of the build. And this is particularly true working in a global studio. So during my tenure at Ubisoft, the way we had our co-development studios structured all around the world on this project was that we basically had at least one office at any given time online working on the project. So it was essentially a 24-hour development cycle. There was always people working on the project. That made it really important when you came into work to make sure you had the latest version that you were building on top of. Depending on the amount of changes, that can take some time. So while you're waiting for that, that's usually the time you would make your second or third or fourth cup of coffee, however many you like to have. and also check emails and that sort of stuff. And in the emails, that's where you would get your firefighting emails, or your, I guess another way to word that would be your major issues emails. So if there is something, for example, that's broken in the build that is blocking perhaps a person or even an entire studio from being able to do their work, that would be your task for the day. That would be your major priority. You would get on that and fix that as fast as possible. Fortunately, or rather hopefully, that doesn't happen too often. So what you would then do is check your project management software, for example, Jira, and that would have your regular task list. So this is things that are not major emergencies for the day, but they're your regular tasks. And this is really going to depend on where you're at in the project. So earlier on in the project, this is going to be a lot of system development work for an engineer. So you're going to have a lot of freedom and creativity here most of the time, where you can actually take the time to sit down and plan the system, design it properly, get some feedback from all of the stakeholders, and then spend a lot of time actually programming the system for the majority of your day. Later on in the project, though, as you get closer to release, and depending on the type of game, post-release, if there's post-launch support, you tend to do less and less large feature work and more bug fixing. Smaller tasks, there's not as much room for creativity or system design necessarily. It's more just, hey, here's a problem, we need to fix it. Your role is going to be less day-to-day programming and more day-to-day debugging. There'll still be programming, of course, depending on the bug, but that can be things from a one-line fix, if it's something like the wrong variable being used or something, right up to, it could turn into a large system design task. For example, if there's an edge case that's been discovered that the system didn't originally handle or wasn't intended to handle, maybe you have to extend the system in order to fix the bug. So then it could snowball. And then, of course, throughout the day, there's your regular meetings. So you have things like your daily stand-up, where you're sharing any blockers or your current progress, getting some feedback from your fellow developers. There's things like code reviews, where you're submitting your code for review or reviewing other people's code, making sure they're meeting the coding standard and that there's not alternative ways to solve the problem that are perhaps more efficient. The majority of the time, you're in Visual Studio or your IDE, coding or debugging. My number one piece of advice for anyone looking to get into game development, whether it's engineering or another discipline, is to specialize as early and as specifically as possible. So rather than trying to just be a jack of all trades in game development, as fun as that can be, definitely try to drill down your discipline. So you can go one level deep. You want to be an engineer or a 3D animator. But if you can go even deeper than that and specify what type of discipline you want to be. So do you want to be a gameplay engineer, a build engineer? Do you want to be a 3D rigger, a 3D animator specifically, an environment artist? Just try to drill down and be as specific as you can with your discipline and your specialization. And then based on that, that's where you want to focus your time and energy. So focus on learning as much as you can if you haven't already in that discipline in terms of the software and the techniques. Staying up to date as new techniques are released all the time in these disciplines and new tools are updated all the time. So make sure you keep your skill set up to date. Make sure you're presenting yourself online as that specialized discipline. So even if you've not worked yet as a professional gameplay engineer, if gameplay engineer is the discipline you want and that's what you've studied and prepared for, call yourself a gameplay engineer on LinkedIn. Tailor your resume and your portfolio to be a gameplay engineer portfolio. Show the work that you've done, even if it's not professional paid work or released games, even if it's just independent projects that you've worked on. Really tailor yourself to your speciality. And the simple reason for that is A, that's going to get you where you want to go, but B, that's what recruiters are looking for. So when they have roles to fill and they're looking on platforms like LinkedIn or on other portfolio sites, they're looking to fill a specialized role. And so if they can see that you will be the perfect fit for that role, then you're more likely to get approached on LinkedIn than if you're just a game developer or a generalist.